Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Nicholas Corsell and you're watching The Literary Nomad. Today's video was inspired by a recent video that I watched by Better Than Food Book Reviews, where he talked about this idea of a list of books that you want to read before you die. And while this might not be a revolutionary idea, it really got me thinking about what are the 10 books that I absolutely must read before I die. And he really challenged everybody in that video to not just list, the classics, not to say, oh, I want to read Infinite Jest and Swan's Way and Gravity's Rainbow and just all of these quote-unquote like difficult books or the books that you have to read, and really think about and cater your list to what you want to get out of reading. And the only real rule was that you can't change your list until after you've completed all 10. So earlier today I spent honestly like around an hour thinking about what these 10 books would be for me. And so in today's video, we're going to run through my 10 books that I must read before I die. Starting out my list is 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. Roberto Bolaño is a Chilean author, and honestly, the whole inspiration for including this on the list was just that I saw a bunch of people who I really respect their opinions on literature talking about how transformative this book was and how it really is like the quintessential book in Latin American letters. And then I started to research like what the book was about, and I saw that like the main city that this book is about is based off of Juarez, Mexico, and all the femicides and the incredible amounts of violence in that city. And it's something that I have researched myself and spent a lot of time thinking about and really just grappling with how a city can just, be so hateful towards its female residents, and how it can just be so openly violent with no real end in sight. And I've heard that this book explores that from really like every different angle and all kinds of different characters. And I've heard that it's, while long and challenging, and I don't typically like super long books, it's something that I really wanted to push myself to read. And honestly, it's the first book that I plan on reading on this list. I bought a copy, and when I go to Argentina next month, I plan on just sitting down and doing the work to get through it. Next up on my list, we have a book called We by Russian writer Yevgeny Zamyatin. And I'm not sure if I got that name correctly, and that's going to be a case with several people on this list. A key common kind of unifying factor of the people on this list is that I either have never read anything by them or I've read very little about them, and they're authors that have, really made me think a lot, and I've been drawn to them, but for some reason I've just never got to it. And so I made a really strong effort in this list to kind of, get something from a lot of different pots so that I can really round out my literary education. And I think that when I finish these 10, I will really have a much better understanding of the literary landscape and of the literary canon that I hope to really contribute to. But regardless, speaking about I came across this book while listening to a podcast that was by the author of Content, the book that I reviewed last week, where he talks about how really Yevgeny Zamyatin is really everything that we ascribe to George Orwell. The root of those ideas comes from him, and specifically this book. He talked about a professor that he had in university that was a massive Russophile and, really, really just loved all things Russia. And he went on about this book. And I think, especially after reading Content and seeing the world that we live in today become, increasingly archaic and dystopian, I think that that's going to be a really important read. And I'm really excited to read it and think about like how somebody from the Soviet Union who was writing a book like, 80, 100 years ago, is accurately characterizing a society that he never could have imagined, right? If you would have showed him an iPhone, he would have been shocked, and he would have said there's no way that happens, or self-driving cars or anything that we have now. Yet he completely nailed what our society looks like. Third up on my list today is a book that I've admittedly committed the cardinal sin with. It's Les Mis by Victor Hugo. And I have watched the movie of this, but I've never read the book. And I know that that's a taboo thing that we shouldn't say, but it's true. I've watched that movie many times. I love the movie. I've just, for some reason, never gotten around to reading it, and it brings me shame. And with this list, I definitely want to make the effort to read it. I think that if the book is half as good as the movie, it'll be well worth the time investment. But I've heard from many people that I respect that the book far outpaces the movie, which makes sense. The book is well over 1,000 pages and the movie is just a couple hours. Of course, there's more detail, more depth, and I really want to become more knowledgeable about French culture, especially of that time period. You know, my family, the whole side of my mom's family, all lived there during that time period, and it's something that I would really love to familiarize myself with more. And I don't know, it brings me a little bit of shame that I've kind of, in very typical American fashion, just kind of ignored like my ancestral roots. And so I think you'll see that as well in this list. But I really want to understand more about the people from the cultures in which I came from. Next up, however, we're moving to the complete opposite side of the world and focusing on what is widely considered to be the greatest Chinese novel of all time. And it's called Dream of the Red Chamber. I know really nothing about it, so this is going to be the smallest section of this video. But to read what is considered by many to be the greatest book from one of the world's oldest civilizations, I think as somebody who really wants to be a champion of global literature, not just things from the West, I think that, I don't know, it'll be very beneficial for me to push myself and to read things from cultures and canons that are widely overlooked in the West. And so I think, you know, where else to start with something like Dream of the Red Chamber, a book that's just super long and was loved by people who have read it and who studied it, and is loved by Chinese and Asian scholars alike. You know, why not give it a try? Why not really put in the work to understand the references? So not just read it at a superficial level, really dig underneath the skin and see what it's all about. And I'm really looking forward to that. That's probably the most intimidating one on this list, just because I know that I'm going to be constantly Googling things, constantly looking up the references, because, you know, if you just read it without doing that extra work, like adding on those supplemental materials and stuff, it's just going to be a very mediocre, superficial, you know, reading, because every little allegory or allusion that he makes, I'm not going to understand, because it's not the culture that I grew up in. I have no idea. Fifth on my list is 100 Years of Solitude by Colombian writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this book is just one that I've heard about constantly. My girlfriend talks about how Gabo is one of her favorite writers. You know, he's just one of those guys, you know, he's like a Hemingway type of figure. He's somebody that you have to read. And for some reason, I've just always put it off. I've never got around to it, and I want to change that. And so I think, you know, where else better to start than with what is widely considered to be his best work, you know. Start at the top and, you know, really see what he has to offer. 6, we have L'Étranger, otherwise known as The Stranger, by French author Albert Camus. And this is a book that, because of its short nature, I would really honestly like to read it in the original French. I know that that's quite an ambitious goal. I would say that my French is like, you know, right in the middle gap between beginner and intermediate, but that's something that I want to change. And living in Paris for a little while now, I've made strides with my French, and I think it's something that I want to continue. And so that's a book that I would just absolutely love to read it in its original language. Read an author that is just very instrumental to my people's canon, and just dig into it and you know, view it from two perspectives. You know, one is a French language learning tool, and two, to really mine out all the philosophical ideas that Camus grapples with, because, you know, he's one of those writers who, there's so much more than story and craft elements. A lot like Dostoevsky in that way, that when you read Camus, you don't read him just for style, you read him for the ideas. You read him because he's just a real titan of intellectualism, more than a great writer, although he is also obviously an incredible writer. Next up, quite simply, is just a book that I've always found to be very interesting, both the story of its publication and its subject matter, and I think it would just really hit all those points of novels that I loved when I was in that gap between like 17 and 20. It's called A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. I don't know, I don't really expect it to change my life, but I really think that it's just going to be like a super fun, super light, interesting read that's right up my alley, or at least right up the alley of where I was a couple years ago. And I would love to tap into that now, as I've grown a lot as a reader, I feel like. I don't know, I just love to revisit those ideas and themes to see how I feel about it now. 8th on the list, and again, these really aren't in any particular order. I probably won't read them down from 1 to 10. I'll just pick and choose whatever I'm in the mood for. But regardless, 8th, we have Ulysses by James Joyce. And this is probably one of the few books on this list that everybody has on their list. You know, Ulysses and James Joyce is just, he's a guy that everybody reads and everybody just applauds as one of the greatest writers to ever walk the face of the earth. I'm really interested in him to explore how he's influenced other writers that I really love. I haven't really loved Joyce. The times that I've tried to read him before, I tried to read The Portrait of the Artist as a young man, and I don't know, I just didn't really click with me. Maybe I wasn't mentally in the space to read it when I picked it up. Maybe I was a little bit too young and too undeveloped. But regardless, I didn't like him that much. but you know, his movements and the things that he does with words were transformative to people that I love, such as Kerouac or even people like Liu Yichang. So yeah, I don't know, I'm really excited to dive into Ulysses, which I know is kind of a beast of a book, and it's going to be a very big challenge, like many of these will, and just really give it my all and just see like what there is to offer with Joyce. Because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I don't get it, but I know that I'm the problem here. Like, I know that I'm the one missing something, not everybody else. Because people whose work I absolutely adore, whose work I absolutely love, list him as their favorite author. I just didn't get it. So I want to do the work, and I want to really inform my decision about Joyce. If after really reading Ulysses and doing the work with the supplemental materials, if I still don't like him, then fine. I'll say I don't like James Joyce, and that's fine. But I want that decision to have some weight before I say it. Next up, we're going back to China and reading I Live in the Slums by Kan Shui. This book is more of a short story collection, and it's super experimental, by far the most avant-garde on the list. And it's just a book that, I don't know, it's been in and out of my Amazon cart for like 3 years, I think, and I've just never pulled the trigger. I don't know why. And I've heard that Kan Shui probably should have won a Nobel, and she hasn't. I don't know, she's just an author that really interests me. The title is just gripping. I don't know, it just really has drawn me in. But for some reason I haven't gotten to reading it. Maybe I'm a little bit intimidated by her style. People always talk about how stylistically she's incredibly difficult. I don't know. Regardless, it's going to come time soon where I want to dive into this and where I just need to get it out of the way and move so I can move on and, you know, find another book to put in my cart for 3 years and not buy. Last and certainly not least, we have Soviet, Ukrainian, Russian writer Mikhail Bulgakov with his masterful novel, Master and Margarita. This book, by many, has been described as the greatest Soviet or Russian or Ukrainian novel that's ever been written. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm really interested in reading more of the French because of my mom's side of the family. I'm also interested in that Soviet stuff because of my father's side of my family. And so I just, you know, did a lot of research, you know, what is the best Soviet book? What is the best Ukrainian? Things like this. The Master and Margarita pops up all the time. I watched a review that Cliff did on Better Than Food, and he lauded it as masterful. And the idea of, like, you know, the devil comes to Moscow, that's a super interesting tagline. You know, who doesn't want to read that story? So I don't know. I think it had to make it on the list, and admittedly around this point of the list I was struggling to have things that I was like, oh, I have to read this. And so I think this is like a really safe, comfortable choice maybe for somebody who wants to read more Russian, Soviet type of stuff. You know, I don't think you can go wrong with The Master and Margarita. Of course, I've never read it, but just based on what everybody else who I really respect are saying, seemed like a great thing to include. And that's my list, the 10 books that I have to read before I die. Now, I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to make any tweaks until I have done all 10 of these books. And of course, I will be making reviews of each on here. And so I don't know, it'll be really interesting to, in like a year or two, I don't know, however long it takes me to read these 10 books, probably like a super long time, because I'm obviously going to read other stuff in between. I still want to allow myself that freedom to be guided by interest and guided by the feelings that I have in the moment. But regardless, I'm going to slowly work through these, review them, think about my thoughts, and then eventually, when I'm done with it all, I'm going to come back and I'm going to make another video similar to this one where I go through all 10 and, you know, talk about did it live up to my expectations, and more importantly, did I get what I was trying to get out of it, right? Because each book on this list I'm reading for a different reason. For like 2666, for example, I want to understand the situation of Juarez. I know that Santa Teresa is different than Juarez, but I want to see like what factors, you know, would make up something like Ciudad Juarez. On the other hand, you know, like with the Russians and the French stuff, I want to experience and learn more about the culture that I, you know, originated from. With Joyce, I want to learn about how he grapples with language and how these seeds that he plants in these books grew into my favorite authors. Things like that. Each person is on the list for a completely different reason. And I don't know, I think that when I get done with these 10, I think that my literary education will have significantly progressed. And I can't wait to see that and really see how I feel and report back to you guys. Regardless, this has been a surprisingly fun exercise to do, and it's really made me think critically about why I read and what I want to read next. And so I would really strongly encourage any of you guys who don't have a like 10 books to read or 5 books to read before I die list to put the effort in, spend an evening, get yourself a bottle of wine, and just really think about what are the books that you want to read before you die. and really come up with a super thoughtful list. And I think that it will really inform and help guide your reading moving forward. Because a lot of times we end up finishing a book, and then we just grab something else randomly. And that's good, and there's value to that, of course. But having something that you can go back to when you have some free time and you are looking for something new to read, and knowing, you know what, a previous version of myself said that they have to read this before they die, and my time on this earth isn't promised, so you know what, I'm going to commit myself to it now. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.